The political earthquake continues to shake Westminster as Prime Minister Keir Starmer finds himself cornered over one of the most embarrassing national security failures in recent British history. What began as a routine espionage prosecution has exploded into a constitutional crisis that threatens to bring down the government. In Parliament, Nigel Farage rose to deliver the confrontation that would define the entire parliamentary session. The collapse of the China spy case has exposed deep fractures within the government's handling of sensitive intelligence matters. Christopher Cash, a former parliamentary researcher, and Christopher Berry, a teacher, were accused of passing politically sensitive information to Chinese intelligence agents between late 2021 and February 2023. This should have been a straightforward prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. Instead, it became a scandal that would reveal the government's true priorities. The Conservative opposition has been relentless in their attacks. They've pointed to specific instances where the previous government clearly identified China as a threat. Between 2021 and 2024, official documents repeatedly described China as the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security.
The previous government's integrated review described China as the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security. In 2024, the Minister for Security said from that dispatch box that China poses a threat. But let's leave aside the government. In 2022, the Director General of MI5 in November classified China as a threat in his remarks. How is it possible that the government failed to provide the evidence that the CPS needed to prosecute?
The substantive evidence was provided in 2023 by the previous government.
But the real smoking gun emerged when witness statements from Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Collins were finally scrutinized. The first substantial statement was provided in December 2023 under the Conservative government. But two additional statements submitted in February and August 2024 after Labour took power told a completely different story. These later statements began referencing a positive relationship with China, using language suspiciously similar to Labour's manifesto. The suggestion that a civil servant would independently insert party political slogans into official witness statements without political guidance is simply absurd. Jacob Rees-Mogg has been particularly scathing in his analysis, arguing that Starmer's foreign policy prioritizes better relations with China, including giving them what he calls a super embassy to spy on us even more effectively.
Government is not providing the evidence that it needs. That's what the CPS has said. Why would the CPS make that up? So what's the government doing? Well, the government's in terrible trouble. And part of Starmer's foreign policy is to have better relations with China. Now, to do that, he wants to give them an embassy.
The super embassy.
Super embassy,
oh,
to
goodness.
spy on us even more.
Yes.
And he's too embarrassed, too ashamed to accept that they are, in fact, an enemy, which they are. And they're an enemy as long as Jimmy Lai rots in durance vile in the new territories in Hong Kong.
We better explain who Jimmy Lai is, a Hong Kong and British businessman who has been in solitary confinement now since, I believe, 2020, on spurious charges of nothing, really, just because he's been a very vocal critic of
on free speech charges, essentially,
yes. Communist Party in China. He remains there. I mean, you make the very good point about the threat. I mean, both Kemi Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat, who we're going to hear from in just a moment, have sort of said to the House, these are all the times that we have described China in the past as a threat.
The Crown Prosecution Service dropped all charges in September, just weeks before the trial was set to begin. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Parkinson, made the extraordinary decision to publicly criticize the government in a letter to parliamentary committees. He revealed that prosecutors had spent months trying to obtain the necessary evidence from government officials, but were repeatedly stonewalled. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has systematically dismantled the government's narrative during Prime Minister's questions. She's demanded to know if Starmer expects Parliament to believe Collins acted entirely alone on such a critical national security matter. This represents either catastrophic governance failure or deliberate deception. Former Conservative Party leader Ian Duncan Smith has been even more direct in his accusations. He's called out the Prime Minister for lying through their teeth about what really happened.
They have lied through their teeth from start to finish on this. The Prime Minister himself dissembled like mad at the dispatch box the other day when he was confronted by Kemi Badenoch about what he had done and what he had said. And now I've come to believe your diagnosis of him, I'm afraid, is absolutely correct.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, looking at the statements that we now know have been released by the Prime Minister and the Downing Street, Director of Public Prosecution Stephen Parkinson said the evidence required from the government in the spying case related to whether China could be considered an enemy under the Official Secrets Act. At no point in any of these statements is that word used or addressed, right? And of course, we are forced to believe by Keir Starmer and his hoods that this guy acted completely and utterly on his own. Matthew Collins decided that he didn't want to cooperate with prosecutors in a very, very, what you might call sensitive public prosecution of spies inside the, as I said, the Palace of Westminster. It just beggars belief. It's nonsense, isn't it?
The timeline of events reveals a pattern of deception that gets worse with each revelation. Ministers initially claimed they were surprised by the case's collapse and had no advance warning. Security Minister Dan Jarvis told Parliament the decision was entirely independent. But when confronted with evidence about crucial meetings, the government was forced to admit they had occurred. Duncan Smith described how they were caught like a smoked kipper in their own deception.
I mean, was the meeting about a five-a-side tournament in Downing Street or something? I mean, what was the meeting about?
Well, it wasn't a red herring. It's the Prime Minister is a dead herring, a kipper, I think is what we call that. And he's well and truly smoked. What's actually happened here is what he was referring to was what I said earlier on. He finally admitted. Now get this, Mike. They had denied that meeting took place for the last, 4 weeks. Categoric, no meeting, no attendance, nothing happened. Now he gets to the dispatch box and he has to say that the meeting took place. Why? Because he got them banged to rights. We have evidence. We have people that attended it saying it. So now what he tries to say is that they had to give a submission by August, not true, and that was the last submission. It was their last submission because they didn't want this to go ahead. So this guy, honestly, frankly, he should be prosecuted for what he actually ended up saying. Right. They have twisted and turned and dumped. And this is one smoked kipper that needs now, frankly, to be dispatched to the dustbin.
The technical aspects of the case make the government's position even more indefensible. A high court ruling in a separate Russian spying case had already established that an enemy under the Official Secrets Act includes any country representing a threat to UK national security at the time of the offense. This legal precedent should have made the China case straightforward. What changed between the Conservative government, when the prosecution proceeded, and the Labour government when it collapsed? Critics are now openly suggesting potential political interference due to economic considerations.
Might be broken with, or he might be accused of not following it.
Oh, yes, exactly.
That's how you get Starmer angry at the dispatch box.
You do. You suggest that he hasn't quite followed the right routine.
You say he's ticked the wrong box or put
Indeed.
his pen back in the wrong drawer.
Exactly. He hasn't crossed the T's and dotted the I's. But I think the central question that comes out of the Prime Minister's admission that meeting did indeed take place.
He told Kemi it did, yes.
Yeah, so he says, first of all, the meeting took place. But then when he was asked, so this Matthew Collins, who is Jonathan Powell's deputy, he's a civil servant. Jonathan Powell is a political appointment, but his deputy is a civil servant. So he is an official. The Prime Minister is asked, are you seriously suggesting that the person that took the decision on whether or not to give the CPS the evidence they needed to proceed with this case against Christopher Berry and Christopher Cash was taken by one official without any consultation at all with his senior, Jonathan Powell, or indeed Jonathan Powell's boss, the Prime Minister? He just took this decision by himself. And this is what the Prime Minister replied.
Is the government seriously saying that only one man, the Deputy National Security Advisor, had anything to do with this failure? Is he seriously saying that the Deputy did not discuss with the National Security Advisor, did not discuss with the Home Secretary or with anyone in Downing Street? Is the Prime Minister seriously saying that?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, let me explain why. Firstly, the case was charged under the last government according to the evidence submitted under the last government, which set out their policy decision.
The parliamentary inquiry that's now underway has seen demands for transparency reached a boiling point. The broader implications are staggering. Britain's intelligence services, including MI5, have repeatedly warned about Chinese espionage activities. Director General Ken McCallum expressed frustration at the case's collapse, understanding that it sends a terrible signal to both allies and adversaries. Duncan Smith, who has been personally sanctioned by China and targeted by Chinese spies, has delivered perhaps the starkest warning. He describes China as posing the greatest threat to our freedom of any single organization or country since easily the Cold War and possibly even the Second World War. The economic dimension cannot be ignored. Britain desperately needs foreign investment to revive its struggling economy. China represents a massive potential source of capital, and there's clear evidence the government prioritized this commercial relationship over national security concerns. The witness statement's emphasis on maintaining positive economic relationships with China reveals where the government's true priorities lie. This scandal also exposes the broader weakness in Britain's approach to authoritarian regimes. While allies like the United States and Australia have taken increasingly firm stances against Chinese espionage and interference, Britain has consistently sought to maintain ambiguous positions that satisfy no one. The result is a country that appears weak to adversaries while disappointing allies who expect stronger leadership. House Speaker Lindsay Hoyle has expressed anger and disappointment, stating he feels Parliament isn't getting adequate protection. When the Speaker, who is supposed to remain politically neutral, makes such pointed criticism, you know the government has seriously mishandled the situation. Former senior officials have expressed bewilderment at the government's position. Former heads of public prosecutions, the civil service, MI6, and national security advisors have all indicated that proving China poses a threat should have been elementary. The fact that the government couldn't or wouldn't do so raises serious questions about political interference. Starmer's promise to publish the witness statements in full represents a desperate attempt at damage control. He's gambling that transparency will somehow vindicate his position, but the evidence suggests it will only deepen the crisis. The statements reveal a government more concerned with protecting commercial relationships with China than defending national security. The China spy case collapse represents more than just a legal failure. It's a symbol of a government that has lost its way on fundamental questions of national security and sovereignty. When Britain can't successfully prosecute clear cases of foreign espionage because of political considerations, it signals weakness that authoritarian regimes will inevitably exploit. The precedent set by this case will encourage further foreign interference. The real question now is whether Parliament and the public will hold this government accountable for prioritizing commercial interests over national security, or whether this scandal will be allowed to fade without meaningful consequences for those responsible. The damage to Britain's credibility has already been done, and the international community is watching to see if Britain still has the resolve to defend itself against hostile foreign powers.